everyone, welcome to the what and why of continuous discovery. I'm Teresa Torres with ProductTalk. One of the things I like to share at the beginning of this talk is that I've had the luxury of working with teams all over the world. Part of the reason why I like to share that is I've worked with companies as small as two-person founding teams, as large as multinational companies with hundreds of thousands of employees in a wide variety of industries. And I want you to know that odds are I've worked with a team like yours. And so as we go through the material, I know it's easy to think about, oh, these tactics or this framework would only work at sort of the hot tech companies like Facebook and Google and Netflix. And really what I want to encourage you to do is to think about how this might work in your organizational context, because odds are I've worked with a team just like yours. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's dive in. What do we mean by discovery? So we often talk about discovery in contrast with delivery, where we use discovery to represent the work that we're doing to decide what to build, and we're using delivery to describe the work we're doing to build, ship, and maintain a production quality product. Now, the reason why these terms are becoming more popular and this distinction matters is because a lot of companies put a lot of emphasis on delivery, and we often forget to also put equal emphasis on discovery. The other thing that we're starting to see is we're starting to see a shift from a project mindset to a continuous mindset. So in a project mindset, we tend to kick off a project. If we're lucky, we're able to do some customer research at the beginning of the project, and then we rely on that research throughout the project. In a more continuous model, we're recognizing that digital products are never done, and we're actually moving our discovery methods to be continuous, where we're engaging with our customers throughout the process, and there's no beginning, there's no middle, and there's no end. We're continuously engaging customers so that we're able to continuously make better decisions about what we're building. And so I want to start with just a clear definition of continuous discovery. This definition comes from my book, Continuous Discovery Habits, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the talk. So I define continuous discovery as weekly touch points with customers by the team who's building the product, where they conduct small research activities in pursuit of a desired product outcome. Now, each line of this definition is pretty important, and I know it's a mouthful, so we're going to go through it line by line. So I'm going to start with this first line that's really about adopting a weekly cadence of engaging with your customers. Why is this so important? So as product people, we make product decisions every day. Some of them are big strategic decisions like which customers should we serve? What outcomes should we pursue? What opportunities should we go after? Others are more pedestrian decisions, like what do we label this button? How do we expose this feature in the interface? How should the underlying data model work, and what should it support? Now, most of us know that we should do some research for those big strategic decisions. We often forget that we could get customer feedback and that we should get that customer feedback on our more daily decisions. And the reason why we want to do that, why we want to build that continuous feedback loop, is because as product people, as we work on our product day in and day out, we start to develop expertise in how our product works. We know where everything lives in the interface. We know how everything works. We know what functionality is supported. We become experts in our own products. The challenge is our customers are usually not experts in our product. They don't know as much about our product as we do, and we start to suffer from this bias called the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge basically says that we forget what it's like to not have our expert knowledge. And because we can't remember what it's like to not know everything about our product, we start to make decisions that won't work for our customers. We're making them from our expert point of view. The good news is there's a really easy way to overcome this, and that's simply to engage with customers on a more regular basis. And for most teams, I recommend that you shoot for a weekly cadence. Now, if you've never talked to a customer or you rarely talk to a customer, this cadence might sound really overwhelming. And so I want to encourage you to take a continuous improvement mindset. If you're rarely talking to customers, just try to increase your frequency. If you're currently talking to them quarterly, try to get to monthly. If you're talking to them monthly, try to get to every other week. Over time, you can reach for this cadence of engaging with customers every week. This is going to help you overcome that curse of knowledge. It's also going to have another benefit. For a lot of us, as we start to increase our discovery activities, we start with a validation mindset. A validation mindset is where we do all the design work up front, and when we're done, we validate through usability testing, did we get it right? It's also when we do all the delivery up front, and then we validate with an A/B test, did we build the right thing? There's nothing wrong with validation research. We should do those activities. But in a good continuous discovery process, we're not just relying on validation research. We want to get feedback earlier in the process when it's less expensive to make changes. So when we get feedback on our half-baked ideas, on our pencil sketches, we start to develop what I call a co-creation mindset. And the value of this mindset is that, again, it's faster, it's easier, it's cheaper to make changes when we're working with pencil sketches, when we're working with half-baked ideas. When we wait and only do validation research, acting on our customer feedback becomes much more expensive, takes much more time. Now, whenever I talk about co-creation, inevitably somebody in the audience is thinking about either the famous Steve Jobs quote where he said customers don't know what they want until we show it to them, or that Henry Ford quote where he allegedly said, if I had asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Now, I want to be clear here. When we're talking about co-creating with customers, I'm not encouraging you to ask your customers what you should build. What Henry Ford and Steve Jobs are getting at in those quotes is that customers don't know what's possible with technology. That's our job. What they do know is about their own lives, about their own world, about their own context, and most importantly, about their own needs, pain points, and desires. So when we talk about co-creating, we're talking about synthesizing what we know about what's possible with technology with what our customers know about their lives so that we're able to co-create better solutions together. And we'll look in the second half of this talk a little bit more about what that looks like. Okay, so we've tackled weekly touch points with customers. I can't emphasize this enough. The second line is it really needs to be the team who's building the product that's engaging with customers on a weekly basis. So some people think about it as there's a discovery team and then there's a separate delivery team. We don't actually want that. We don't want a handoff between the team that's doing all the research, engaging with customers, and the team that's building the product. So we really want the same team, the delivery team, to also be doing their own discovery. And this starts with this idea of a product trio. And a typical product trio is comprised of a product manager, a designer, and a software engineer. They're working together from the very beginning, making decisions about what to build. And so what that means is this is the team that's engaging with customers on a weekly basis. Now, most of us have more than just 3 people on our team. You probably have additional engineers. Depending on your DevOps strategy, you might have a release manager or some QA folks on your team. Depending on how you engage with the rest of the business, you might have a data analyst or a customer success person or a product marketing manager on your team. Maybe if you're lucky, you have a user researcher on your team. So I want to be really clear here when we talk about a product trio, we're not making discovery exclusive. We're not saying that a trio is the only part of the team that's doing discovery. We're saying the trio is the minimum team that's leading discovery. So the idea here is that we want a cross-functional approach to discovery. We want the right roles in the room depending on the types of decisions that we're making. And at a minimum, those right roles are a product manager, a designer, and a software engineer. But this idea can flex based on the type of decision that you're making and the roles that are available to you. The thing to understand is that we're trading off speed of decision making with quality of decision making. So the more people involved in any decision, the slower you'll go. But the decision will get better if you have the right roles in the room. So generally we say we want to see at least the trio involved in every decision. But then depending on the type of decision, you could grow or shrink your team based on what the type of decision you're trying to make. So for example, if you are making decisions about your underlying data model, you might invite more of your engineers to be part of that decision. If you're making decisions about your go-to-market strategy, you might invite your product marketing manager to be part of that discovery. So again, this idea can flex, but we want discovery being led by the product trio. Okay, so now that we've tackled weekly touch points with customers by the team building the product, let's get into the second half of our definition. This is where we're going to look at the trio is engaging with customers on a weekly basis. Their goal is to conduct small research activities in pursuit of a desired product outcome. These last two lines are really critical. We don't want to take our old project-based research methods and try to jam them into a weekly cadence. We'd simply burn ourselves out. So we have to change our research methods to be smaller and more iterative. We also want to remember that our goal is to drive an outcome. We're not doing research for research's sake. We're doing research so that we can create customer value in a way that creates business value. And that last piece, creating customer value in a way that creates business value, is not as easy as it sounds. So I like to use this visual called an opportunity solution tree to help teams keep this aligned. So we're going to start at the top by defining a clear outcome. Your outcome represents business value. So usually when we're talking about outcomes, we start with our business model and we're looking at business metrics, financial metrics. We're looking at increasing revenue, and our business model tells us how we might increase revenue. And then we're going to translate that to a product outcome that represents a behavior in the product. And so the key to remember right now is that an outcome, that blue box at the top of your tree, represents business value. It's how you're going to ensure that your business is going to stay viable over time, how you're increasing a financial metric. Now, a good product team, of course, also wants to be customer-centric, and so we need to look at how we can also create customer value. And this is where we're going to discover the opportunities that have the potential to drive our outcome. Now, opportunities represent customer needs, customer pain points, and customer desires. So again, the opportunity space represents customer value, and we're looking at what's the customer value that if we created it would in turn create business value by driving our outcome. Now, in this model, I want to emphasize something that's a little bit different. We're starting with an outcome. That's different from what we've historically done. Historically, product teams have started with output. We've said, here's a fixed roadmap. Please deliver this roadmap on time. And we set our teams off to go deliver a bunch of output. The problem with this model is that it assumes we can predict the future, right? And if we learned anything in 2020, it's that the future is far more ambiguous and uncertain than we could possibly imagine. If you had started January 2020 with a fixed roadmap, my guess is by March of 2020, when the whole world had to respond to COVID and we started working from home and we saw a global economic slowdown, your roadmap probably changed significantly. Now, fortunately, we're probably not going to face a global pandemic every year of our lives, but we do see constant change in an internet world. We see new technology disrupt what's possible. We see new competitors disrupt the market. We see even our own code changes shift customer behavior. So the shift from outputs to outcomes gives us more flexibility, it gives us more agility, it allows us to respond to what we're hearing from our customers. So we're basically saying we're starting with an outcome that represents business value. This is how we can ensure that our business is viable over time. We want to be customer centric, so we're discovering the opportunities that represent customer value, that if we were to address those opportunities would drive our outcome. Now, in this model, outputs still matter. We do have to discover the solutions that will deliver on those opportunities in a way that will drive our outcome. So we're going to look at how does a team build out this structure and manage their discovery work in a way that they're able to set good outcomes, discover customer value by uncovering needs, pain points, and desires that collectively represent the opportunity space, and then, of course, discover the solutions that will deliver on both. So it starts by defining a clear outcome. And in an ideal world, this is a two-way negotiation between your product leader, that's your chief product officer, your vice president of product. At some companies, it might be your chief technology officer. At a really large company, it might be the general manager of your business unit and the product trio. And the reason why this should be a two-way negotiation is because usually that executive is going to communicate business value in a business outcome. something like a financial metric. So I'm going to use Netflix as my examples throughout this talk, mostly because people around the world are familiar with Netflix and their business model. So in this case, you might imagine somebody at Netflix, an executive, might tell a product trio, we need you to focus on subscriber retention. That comes directly from Netflix's subscriber business model, right? They have a subscription business model. One of the key metrics in a subscription business is subscriber retention over time. So we probably could imagine that there's a product team, if not multiple teams at Netflix, focused on driving that metric. The problem with that metric is it's hard for a product team to drive that metric directly. It's a financial metric. And really what a product team wants to look for is a behavior in the product that would, if they drove that metric, would in turn drive the business metric. So the product trio is going to take that business outcome and translate it to a product outcome. So they're looking for a behavior in the product that they believe will drive, that's a more direct outcome that they can drive that will in turn drive that business outcome. So in this case, the product trio might say, we believe if you watch Netflix more, you'll be more likely to retain. So we're going to set our product outcome as an engagement metric. We're going to look at viewing minutes per week. With that in place, our team is now going to start looking at what are the small research activities that we're going to adopt on a continuous cadence. And the first one is they're going to interview weekly to discover the opportunity space. Now remember, the opportunity space is always changing, so we want to interview weekly to make sure that we always have tabs on the current opportunity space. So opportunities represent customer needs, pain points, and desires. Those are always shifting. We want to make sure we're continuously investing in our understanding. So we're interviewing every week to discover the opportunity space. Now that sounds simple, but in my experience working with teams, it's actually not that simple. And the reason why most teams don't interview every week is because recruiting is a significant barrier. It's hard to find people to talk to. So what I recommend is teams start by automating the recruiting process. This is going to sound magical, but what it looks like is I want you to wake up on Monday morning, look at your calendar, and already have an interview scheduled without you having to do anything to put it there. This is not magical. It is very possible. It does take a little bit of work. You have to invest in your infrastructure. I'm going to give you 3 strategies for how to do this. The first one is you can recruit people while they're visiting your product, while they're using your product or service, or while they're visiting your website. This works fantastic when you're recruiting B2C customers or when you're recruiting B2B end users. So if the people that you need to interview are using your product or service, you can ask them to participate in an interview while you already have their attention. The way that this works is really simple, but it's going to take some work. You're going to embed somewhere in your product through a pop-up, through an interstitial, through somewhere in your interface. There's lots of ways to do this. You're going to embed an ask, where you're going to ask for a small amount of time in exchange for a reward. And when they opt in, and again, that's the key, is your customer is going to opt in, you're going to send them a scheduling link where they can pick a time and it shows up on your calendar automatically. Now, if you implement this strategy, it's not going to be simple. It's not going to just work. You're going to have to treat it like a product funnel where you're going to have to optimize the different variables. Where do you show it? Who do you show it to? How much time do you ask for? What do you offer as an incentive? How far out in the future do you schedule? So you're going to have to take a product mindset to this, but I will share the vast majority of teams that I work with are using this strategy to automate their interviewing recruitment such that they wake up on Monday morning and there's an interview on their calendar for that week without them having to do anything. Now, if you need to recruit B2B buyers, your decision makers, they're probably not living within your product, so this strategy is not going to work. Instead, I'm going to give you a second strategy. This is where you can define triggers for your support teams. These are your customer-facing teams who are already on the phone with your customers day in and day out. Your sales teams, your account management teams, your support teams, your customer success teams. Again, it's anybody who's already on the phone with your customer. You can define triggers for them, basically say, if you're talking to a customer who's experiencing this need or has this pain point, go ahead and put an interview on our calendar for us. Ask them if they'll participate in an interview, offer a reward. So in this previous strategy, we're using our product to recruit. In this strategy, we're using our customer-facing teams to recruit. but we're letting them do all the legwork. We're asking them to put the interview directly on our calendar for us. I will share the vast majority of teams that I work with are using these first two strategies to completely automate their recruiting process. In this second strategy, it's going to require that you define new triggers week to week, depending on what you're trying to learn. You'll have a little bit of that legwork in the first strategy as well, because you might change some of the variables, like who you show it to, what you ask for, things like that. There are some really rare cases, and I can't emphasize that these are rare. I can't emphasize enough that these are rare cases where these first two strategies are not going to work. The first case is when your target audience is extremely hard to reach. Now, we all think our customers are hard to reach. They're not as hard as you think. I'm talking about Fortune 500 CEOs. I'm talking about respiratory ICU physicians and nurses during the height of COVID. That's one situation where I'm going to give you a third strategy. The second situation where this third strategy is going to work is when you have a teeny tiny total addressable market. I don't mean a small number of customers. I mean a teeny tiny total addressable market. So I'm going to give you two examples. I worked with a company where their total addressable market was large movie studios based in the United States. There were 6 companies total that met their criteria. The second instance was I worked with a company in Canada, in British Columbia, where their customers were Canadian medical schools. Maybe there's a dozen of them or a couple dozen of them. Teeny tiny total addressable markets. Or if your customers are extremely hard to reach, what you can do is you can set up a customer advisory board where you invite a small number of customers to participate in a long-term relationship where you're engaging them for a year and you're asking them to participate in monthly interviews. Again, you're not engaging them as a focus group, but you're engaging them with one-on-one interviews. The reason why I only recommend this strategy is if you're falling into one of those two categories where you have a teeny tiny total addressable market or your customers are extremely hard to reach, is because you're going to run the risk of building a product for a small subset of your customers. But if you're in one of those two situations, you can use this strategy to help you get started, and then eventually I want you shifting to one of the other two strategies. Okay. Now that we know how to get a customer in the room, we need to talk about how to ask the right questions. And the key to interviewing well is to avoid speculation. So let me illustrate this. I want you to imagine that you work at Netflix and you're trying to interview Netflix customers, and you want to know things like, what do they like to watch? How do they decide what to watch? Who do they watch with? What device do they watch on? Where do they watch? I could ask all these questions in an interview, but I'm going to get speculative answers. Research tells us humans are particularly bad at answering direct questions out of context. You're going to give me fast answers, but they're not necessarily going to reflect your behavior in reality. We rarely take the time to reflect on our own behavior, and so these direct questions lead to speculative answers. What I want to do instead is focus on collecting specific stories about past behavior. So if I ask you, what do you like to watch? Your answer is going to be speculative. If I ask you to tell me about your experience on Netflix, your answer is going to be speculative. But if I ask you, tell me about the last time you watched Netflix, that's a story about a specific instance in the past. I can listen for, what did you watch? How did you decide? Where were you? Who were you with? What device did you watch on? And your answers, because they're grounded in a specific instance, are going to be much more reliable. The other benefit of asking for specific stories is opportunities start to emerge from our customer stories. We start to hear needs, we start to hear pain points, we start to hear desires. That's going to allow us to start to map out the opportunity space. And remember, opportunities represent customer value. So as we map out the opportunity space, we're going to start to ask the question, which of these opportunities do we think best have the possibility of driving our outcome? And that's going to help us evaluate how we can create customer value in a way that will also create business value. Because remember, our outcome represents business value. Once we choose a target opportunity, I want you to work with 3 solutions at once. Now, this is very different from what most teams do. Most teams hear a customer need and they jump to their first solution. and they say, is this idea good or not? That's how they're framing their discovery question. So they start prototyping, they get some qualitative feedback, and they're stuck because they're asking, was that feedback good enough or not? Or they run a quantitative test and they get a conversion rate and they're looking at the number and they're stuck asking, is that number good enough or not? Decision-making researchers tell us this framing is really problematic. They call it a whether or not decision. When we set up a whether or not decision, we fall prey to two different cognitive biases. The first is called the escalation of commitment. When we work with one idea at a time, we tend to fall in love with our idea. That's because the escalation of commitment says the more we invest in something, the more we identify with it, the more we commit to it. This is why we see lots of product teams fall in love with bad ideas. The second bias this is going to exacerbate is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias suggests that we're more likely to see the evidence that supports our idea, and we're going to completely miss the evidence that suggests our idea is flawed. Now, a lot of people misunderstand confirmation bias. They think it means that you're ignoring the negative evidence, and so they feel like as long as they're seeing some negative feedback, they're not falling prey to confirmation bias. That's not true. You might see some of it, but confirmation bias says you're more likely to not notice negative feedback. So it's not that you're ignoring it, it's that your brain is filtering it out. You're not even noticing it. So you could be doing a lot of the right research activities and not getting as much benefit from them as you could. Fortunately, there's a very easy way to fix this, and that's to set up a compare and contrast decision. So instead of saying, is my idea good or not, I want you to ask which of these ideas look best, which are most promising. This idea of comparing and contrasting solutions is so important that I'm going to give you a visual to help you remember this. This is Usain Bolt. He was once the world's fastest 100-meter runner. If you saw him running around a track by himself and I asked you, is he fast? I want you to hear a whether or not question. I want you to ask, is he fast relative to what? Is he fast relative to a cheetah? Probably not. Is he fast relative to a Tesla? In the first 100 meters, I would pay to see that race. Is he fast relative to other humans? Absolutely. So what we're seeing in this photo on the right is a compare and contrast decision where we have a clear front runner. This is what we're looking for when we're evaluating our solutions. We want to be working with 3 solutions at a time, comparing and contrasting them against each other until we identify a clear front runner. Now, the reason why most teams don't do this is because we're still doing big project-based research to evaluate our solutions. And we simply don't have time to do project-based research for 3 different ideas. So we have to change our research methods. Now, to illustrate our new research methods, our more continuous research methods, I'm going to give another example using Netflix. So I want you to imagine that we interviewed a bunch of Netflix customers, and one of the things that we heard over and over again is Netflix is pretty good for movies and TV shows, but it's not good for live sports. So I want you to imagine that we heard over and over again this target opportunity, I want to watch sports. Now, as a good product team, we know we should generate 3 good solutions. And so we start brainstorming and we think about how might we address this opportunity, and we come up with these 3 solutions. The first solution is very US-centric, but I'll explain it. A lot of our sports are on our local public channels, ABC, CBS, and NBC. So in order to solve the I want to watch sports opportunity in the US, Netflix could partner with these local channels and integrate a live feed into the Netflix interface. That's the first solution. The second solution would be Netflix could partner with sports leagues the same way they partner with movie studios. So today they partner with movie studios and license movies to show in the interface. We could instead partner with Major League Baseball, the National Hockey League, the Premier League in Europe, and license sporting games, the actual events, and show them directly in Netflix. The third potential solution is we could say, we're Netflix, we're not that good at sports, we don't really want to invest in getting good at sports. Let's just partner with somebody who's already done that work. Fubo TV is a streaming service that's already partnered with a whole bunch of TV channels so they can stream live sports via those TV channels. And maybe Netflix partners with Fubo TV and says, let's bundle our subscriptions together so that when you buy a Netflix subscription, you automatically get a Fubo TV subscription. Okay, we've now got 3 solutions for our same target opportunity. We want to compare and contrast them against each other. They're so big, we don't want to do big project-based research to evaluate which one we want to pursue. Instead, the key is to take these 3 solutions and to break them down into their underlying assumptions and to rapidly test the assumptions they depend upon. Now, this is not a new idea. Eric Ries wrote about it 10 years ago in his book, The Lean Startup. Most of us are still not doing it, and the reason why is it's hard to see our own assumptions. So I'm going to give you some strategies for how to identify assumptions. Assumptions tend to come in 5 categories. The first 3 might be familiar to you because this Venn diagram is becoming very common and popular in the product world. We talk about making desirable, viable, and feasible products. It turns out these are also the same categories in which we make assumptions. So for example, with desirability, we make assumptions about why we think our customers will want this solution. We also make assumptions about what they're willing to do to get value from the solution. The second category, viability, we're making assumptions about why it's good for our business, why our business should build this. If we're an outcome-focused team, this is as simple as, why do we assume this solution will drive our outcome? The third category are feasibility assumptions. We're assuming it's possible to build this. So we can start to generate, why do we think it's possible to build this? I'm going to add 2 categories to this. The first is usability assumptions. We make assumptions about, will our customers be able to do what we need them to do? Can they find it? Can they understand it? Can they do each step that they need to do to get value from the solution? The 5th category are ethical assumptions. And we want to ask, is there any potential harm in building this solution? And what are we assuming to prevent or to avoid harm? So this is where we can look at things like, what data do we need for this solution to work? Are our customers comfortable giving us that data? Can we store it safely? Are we selling it to third parties? Are they using it ethically? This is also where we can look at things like social inclusivity. And we can ask, does this solution replicate some of the inequities we see in our communities? So we can look at who we choosing to serve, and as a result, who we choosing to leave out. We see a lot of products assume there's a broadband connection, that customers have a broadband connection, and we see that we're choosing to serve our urban dwellers and maybe leaving out some of our rural dwellers. So this ethical category is a really big one that we can explore, and just asking, based on our assumptions that we're making about how the solution might work, is there any potential harm? Who might we be leaving out? Now, knowing these 5 categories will help you generate assumptions, but it's still easy to be blind to our assumptions. So I want to give you another strategy for how you can generate assumptions, and that's that you can story map your ideas, and your story maps will help you generate assumptions. Now, if you're not familiar with story mapping, I'll walk you through it. It's the yellow boxes on this slide. So first, I'm going to assume that my solution already exists. So I'm fast forwarding into the future. We already built the idea. It exists. And I'm mapping out, what does my customer need to do to get value from this solution? Okay, so in this case, I'm integrating ABC, NBC, and CBS, those local channels, into Netflix, where we're integrating a live feed so that on Netflix, you can watch whatever's currently on NBC, for example. What does my subscriber need to do to get value from this solution in order for it to address my target opportunity? I want to watch sports. First, they have to decide they want to watch a sporting event. They have to choose a streaming service. Hopefully they're choosing Netflix. They have to open that streaming service. They have to find the local channel, and then they have to watch that local channel. That's the yellow boxes. That's our simple story map. The value of this is I can now ask for each step in my story map, what needs to be true for my customer to be able to do each step? So in order for my customer to decide to watch the game, they have to want to watch sports. This is where I'm starting to generate assumptions in the gray boxes. I'm going step by step through my story map, saying what needs to be true. In this case, they need to be a sports fan. In order for them to choose Netflix, what needs to be true? They have to know Netflix has sports. They have to want to watch sports on Netflix, meaning they have to not already have a sports provider that they watch on. They have to know what channel the game is on. So in order for this particular solution to work, they have to know that their sporting event is on ABC or NBC, and they have to know which channel to choose. We have to be able to partner with ABC and NBC. We have to be able to partner with those channels in a viable way that will work for our business. We have to hope that the game's not blacked out. So here in the US, we have all these really archaic market regional blackouts where you might get NBC, the game might be on right now, but it may not be on in your region. In order for them to watch the game, we have to be able to create a nice viewing experience. And this sounds trivial, but when we're talking about Netflix, they currently stream movies and TV shows, which are really easy to buffer to create a nice streaming experience. But when we're talking about live sports, buffering becomes a problem because you start to fall behind live and you run into the situation where maybe your buddy is watching on cable and they text you, but you're 3 minutes behind and they tell you about a goal you haven't seen yet, right? So we are starting to uncover feasibility assumptions. Can we do this well? Now, the value of doing this is that we can rapidly test our assumptions. Testing the whole idea might take a long time. Testing assumptions, we can tend to test assumptions in a few hours, a day or two. I'm going to show you how. And we can test multiple assumptions from different ideas, right? We're working with 3 ideas. We can test multiple assumptions from different ideas, and that gives us the data we need to make a good compare and contrast decision. So let me show you how this works. I'm going to give you 4 ways to rapidly test your assumptions. The first is we can prototype to simulate a specific moment. So if I'm trying to test this assumption our subscribers want to watch sports, I don't have to prototype the whole solution. I don't want to. I don't want to do all the design work before I know this is the right thing to build. I'm going to prototype just enough to simulate that moment in the story map. So what that looks like is I might create a mock-up of some TV shows, some movie options, some sporting events, and ask you, what would you like to watch right now? And if you're a sports fan, I would expect you some of the time to pick a sporting event. If I have access to an unmoderated testing tool, I can upload this mock-up, I can type in my question, I can have you record a video, and I can get responses in less than 24 hours. And because this is a teeny tiny prototype test, the videos that I have to watch are 2 minutes long, not 15 minutes long, which means I can process the results and make a decision about my assumption in a day. It's very quick. Second way I can test this assumption is with a 1-question survey. The key with a 1-question survey is that it's literally 1 question and it lives within your product or service. So you're asking people the question while you have their attention, which makes it very fast to collect a lot of responses. So in this case, I can ask, have you watched a sporting event in the past week? Yes or no. This is going to help me quickly poll, are my subscribers sports fans? As long as you have any amount of traffic, most people can collect a reasonable number of survey responses in a few hours or a day or 2 at most. Third way I can test this assumption is I can ask, are my customers already exhibiting the behavior I would expect to see if this assumption were true? So what data can I look at? Behavioral analytics, support tickets. I can go talk to my sales folks. I can talk to my account managers. Are our customers already exhibiting the behavior we would expect to see? In this case, if I'm trying to test the assumption our subscribers want to watch sports, I could look at Netflix search queries. Do we have customers who are already searching for sporting events? This is something I can do in an hour or 2 and start to collect evidence to evaluate, is my assumption true or not? These 3 strategies, prototyping to simulate a very specific moment, not the whole solution, 1-question surveys, and data mining existing data, is going to help you test a wide variety of different types of assumptions. I'm going to give you a 4th strategy that's going to work really well for feasibility assumptions. We often ask our engineers to go do a research spike. That's a time-boxed activity where we're asking them to investigate something. In this case, I want them investigating a very specific feasibility assumption. So let's imagine that we're going to partner with NBC, and one of our feasibility assumptions is NBC can give us appropriate metadata about what's currently on so that we can show a title, a description, and an image in our interface of what's on NBC right now. That's a feasibility assumption. So we might give our engineers that task and say, go pull 24 hours worth of data from the NBC feed and evaluate the percent of the time that they give us an appropriate title and an appropriate description and an appropriate image that we can display. This is, again, a very targeted task. We're not just saying go investigate what it would take to implement this. We're asking them to collect specific data so we can evaluate a very specific assumption. This is doing two things. It's helping us compare and contrast this solution, right? It's giving us data about the feasibility of a solution. It's also going to help us improve our delivery estimates because we're removing unknowns from the delivery process. Okay, these 4 strategies are going to help you quickly evaluate solutions so you can set up a good compare and contrast decision. Now, we just covered a lot of ground quickly, so I'm going to give you a brief recap. We started at the top where we talked about defining a clear outcome. Your outcome represents business value. This should be a two-way negotiation between your business leader, who's probably going to communicate a business outcome, and your product trio needs to translate that to a product outcome, a behavior that occurs within the product. Once that's in place, we're going to do 2 research activities on a weekly basis. The first is we're interviewing to discover the opportunity space to make sure that we can create customer value. Once we choose a target opportunity, we're working with a set of solutions. And the second activity we're doing on a continuous basis is rapid assumption testing so that we can compare and contrast our solutions against each other and evaluate which solution is most likely going to address our target opportunity, creating customer value in a way that will drive our outcome, creating business value. Now, because we covered a lot of ground quickly, I do want to let you know everything we covered is covered in detail in my book, Continuous Discovery Habits. I wrote this book to be a product trio's guide to putting this framework into practice. It will help you develop good habits like weekly interviewing, weekly assumption testing, comparing and contrasting, setting good outcomes. It's meant to be a practical hands-on guide. It includes activities you can do with your team. It teaches you exactly what to do when. This book is available in bookstores around the world. If you want to learn more about it, go to continuousdiscoveryhabits.com. All right, thank you very much.